The driveway was concrete and ordinary, and it would become the most important 40 feet of ground in Greenvale, Ohio before the afternoon was finished. There was a cracked recycling bin near the garage door. There was a torn bag of premium dog food with its contents spreading slowly across the pavement in a wide, unhurried spill. There were 2 patrol cars parked at aggressive angles, their engines still ticking with heat, blocking the street in the particular way that police vehicles are positioned when the officer driving them has already decided what he is going to find. And there was Officer Craig Voss, with his knee between Diane Mercer's shoulder blades pressing down. He pressed the way a man presses when he needs his body to say something his voice cannot say cleanly in front of cameras. The pressure was not incidental. It was deliberate, graduated, designed to communicate a specific message to the woman beneath him about the location of power in this particular moment, on this particular driveway on Sycamore Bluff Court. Diane's wrists were already cuffed behind her back. The metal had been applied too tight on the left side. She had noted this the way she noted everything, with the mechanical precision of someone trained to catalog the details of hostile situations while remaining outwardly composed. Her cheek was against the concrete. She did not cry out. She did not beg. She did not close her eyes. She turned her head slightly, the rough surface dragging against her cheekbone, and she looked at the wooden fence that separated her backyard from the driveway. Bravo and Colt had been barking behind it for 4 minutes, deep, rhythmic, territorial. At first, then something else. Something that had been shifting register for the last 90 seconds into a frequency Diane recognized from 11 years of working with military animals in conditions that were considerably worse than a suburban driveway in Ohio. She recognized it because she had built it. She had trained both of them to reach that register when their handler's distress crossed a specific threshold. She had spent months calibrating exactly when that threshold should activate and exactly what should follow it. What followed it was the gate. It swung inward without ceremony. Rosa Calloway, 62 years old and retired from emergency medicine, had moved along the fence line while keeping her phone level, and she had found the latch without breaking her recording angle, and she had lifted it with the same calm she had applied to 30 years of controlled crises. Because this was a controlled crisis, and she understood her role in it. 2 Belgian Malinois came through the gate. The word that most of the neighbors would reach for afterward was charge, but that word carries an implication of recklessness that was not present. What Bravo and Colt did across that lawn was faster than a charge and more deliberate than an attack. They covered 40 feet in a movement that seemed to compress time, their bodies low, and their trajectory splitting. Bravo angling toward Voss, Colt spreading wide toward the space where Officer Noah Trask had been standing before he stumbled backward off the curb. Voss's hand left Diane's wrist and went to his holster. The phones across the street were already up. The neighbors on the porches had stopped breathing. The dogs reached Diane and formed around her, not on top of her, around her, in a protective geometry that was not instinct. It was training. Years of it. The precise, intentional architecture of a handler who had spent 11 years building animals that could operate in the worst conditions on Earth and still respond to a single word. Voss had his weapon fully drawn. His hand, for the first time that afternoon, was not entirely steady. And then, the woman handcuffed on her own driveway lifted her head from the concrete, with Voss's knee still between her shoulder blades, and said one word: "Stay." The dog stopped, not slowing, not transitioning. One state and then the other, instantaneous, the way a sound stops when the source is removed. Bravo and Colt were motionless in the middle of the lawn, 8 feet from Voss's weapon fangs, still visible. Eyes locked on him with an attention that was total and unblinking and absolutely perfectly controlled. The street went silent. The lawnmower 3 blocks over had stopped. The bird song had stopped. The ambient hum of a Tuesday afternoon in a quiet suburb had stopped. The only sound was Officer Craig Voss's breathing, which was audible to the woman he was kneeling on. He stood there with his weapon pointed at 2 stationary animals and 6 phones, recording every second of it, and something moved across his face that he would not have been able to name if asked. It was not fear exactly. It was the beginning of an understanding, arriving slowly, the way very bad news arrives in stages, that the situation he was in was not the situation he had thought he was in when he accelerated into this cul-de-sac 14 minutes ago. Diane Mercer looked up at him. She was not afraid. She had not been afraid for a single moment of this encounter. Not when the cruiser screamed into the street. Not when he grabbed her shoulder before she finished her second sentence. Not when the concrete came up to meet her cheekbone. She was not afraid, because she understood with a completeness that Voss was only beginning to approach exactly how this ended. Here is what Officer Craig Voss did not know. Kneeling on a woman in her own driveway on Sycamore Bluff Court, with 6 cameras on him, and 2 military dogs 8 feet away. He did not know that of the 19 people in the United States currently holding an active credential as a certified federal K-9 evaluator issued by the United States Department of Justice, renewed every 3 years, held exclusively by individuals whose careers had demonstrated an exceptional mastery of both canine behavior and the law governing how working dogs are deployed by law enforcement. One of them was the woman whose shoulder blades his knee was currently compressing. He did not know that no law enforcement agency in Ohio could field a working dog without that evaluator's signed certification. That the Greenvale Police Department's own K-9 unit, the 3 dogs and 3 handlers that his colleagues worked alongside every week, operated on a certification that bore her signature. That the next renewal was scheduled in 11 weeks. He did not know any of it. He was about to. Stay with this story. Because in a few minutes, Officer Noah Trask is going to crouch down beside one of those frozen dogs and read what is stamped on the back of a collar tag. And when he stands up and shows it to his partner, when Voss takes that tag out of Trask's hand, because he needs to see it himself, because his brain cannot process what his partner is telling him, the expression that crosses his face is the moment this story becomes something no one on Sycamore Bluff Court will forget for the rest of their lives. And neither will he. Diane Mercer had come home to Ohio the way a lot of veterans come home without a plan that translated cleanly into civilian life, with a set of skills that had no obvious equivalent in the regular world, and with the particular kind of exhaustion that doesn't announce itself because the person carrying it stopped noticing it years ago. She had grown up outside Dayton's second of 3 children, raised by a mother who worked 2 jobs and operated on the unspoken principle that complaining was a luxury the family could not afford. Diane had absorbed this without being told. She finished things, homework, arguments, problems. She did not leave loose ends. She had entered the Army at 22, with the sense that it was the only door in a hallway that opened, and she had walked through it with the same thoroughness she applied to everything. The K-9 handler assignment had come at the end of her first deployment, following a unit evaluation that noted her aptitude for animal response assessment in language that made the evaluating officer stop and read his own notes a second time. He had written displays an intuitive ability to read canine behavioral indicators under operational stress that significantly exceeds peer standard. It was the most precise way he had found to describe a quality for which he had no formal language, the quality that meant dogs trusted her. Not sentimentally, structurally, in the way that mattered in forward positions, where an animal's hesitation was measured in seconds and seconds were measured in lives. She spent 11 years as a Special Operations K-9 handler. 3 deployments. 4 dogs across those years, losing 1 in her second deployment to circumstances she had learned not to revisit carefully because there was nothing to be gained by the revisiting, and the weight of it didn't decrease with repetition. She trained her replacements. She trained other handlers' dogs. Eventually, she trained the handlers. By the time she separated at the rank of Master Sergeant, her record was the kind that used words like exceptional and unparalleled in contexts where those words were not given away lightly. The Federal K-9 Evaluator credential had come 2 years after separation. The DOJ program was small by design, 19 evaluators nationally because the standard was high, and the stakes of a compromised evaluation were measured in public safety. An improperly certified or undertrained K-9 deployed against the public was not merely ineffective, it was dangerous. It was a rights violation that could be documented and prosecuted, and that reflected on the agency that had fielded it. Diane understood this with the completeness of someone who had seen both ends of it. She had seen what a well-handled dog could do, and what a poorly handled one could do, and the difference was never the animal. The property on Sycamore Bluff Court had come 3 years ago, the same year her husband Marcus died. Marcus had been a combat medic 2 tours, the kind of service that uses a person up in ways that don't appear on any medical chart until they do, and he had died of a cardiac event at 51 that the official documentation attributed to service-related physiological stress. Diane had read those words several times before putting the paperwork in the drawer. It was a very precise way of saying what it needed to say without having to look at the thing it was describing. She had bought the house for the yard. She had licensed the training facility because she needed the structure that a business provided a reason to get up at a specific time, a set of obligations that organized the hours. Bravo and Colt had come through the Army's post-service animal placement program 18 months after she moved in. Former working dogs placed with qualified handlers. She had applied for them with the same methodical thoroughness she applied to everything, and they had arrived on a Thursday in a transport crate from Fort Campbell, and by Saturday morning they were sleeping at the foot of her bed. They had been with her for 2.5 years. They knew the sound of her truck's engine from a quarter mile. They had been trained to operate in conditions designed to destabilize, and they responded exclusively to her commands. German for active work. One English override built in from the beginning, because English carried different acoustic properties, and she wanted a word that could cut through noise and distance without being confused with anything else. Stay. She had not anticipated needing it on her own driveway, but she had built it in anyway, because she was the kind of person who planned for the things she hoped would never happen. The morning of the arrest, she had been unloading from a supply run. 40 pounds of specialty feed, a replacement latch for the kennel gate, medication for Colt's left shoulder, a joint that ached in cold weather and required management, the specific residue of an operational deployment that he carried the way Marcus had carried his in the body quietly without complaint. She had been thinking about the recertification schedule she needed to submit to the DOJ contractor office by Friday. Running it through her head in the sequenced, waste-free way she organized most things. She had not been thinking about Craig Voss. Craig Voss had 8 years with Greenvale PD and a reputation that meant different things depending on who you asked. To the colleagues who shared his particular understanding of the job, that authority asserted confidently enough rarely required further justification. He was reliable. To the 4 people who had filed complaints against him in those 8 years, he was something else. The complaints shared a pattern that a careful reader would have found instructive. Every single complainant had been doing something unremarkable when they attracted Voss's attention. Driving, walking, standing near a vehicle. None of them had done anything that constituted reasonable suspicion for a stop. None of them shared any characteristic, except the one that appeared to be doing the work. The complaints had been investigated by Greenvale PD's Internal Review Board, supervised by Sergeant Raymond Colton, who was Voss's brother-in-law. All 4 had been cleared. Insufficient evidence. Complaining party unavailable for follow-up. Officer's account consistent with available documentation. Voss had noticed Diane Mercer approximately 3 weeks after she moved onto Sycamore Bluff Court. He had driven past her property 12 times in 14 months. She had logged every instance, time, vehicle, number, direction of travel in a notebook she kept in the kitchen drawer, because she was the kind of person who logged things, and because she understood from experience that logs became important at specific moments. that you could not always predict in advance. She had not escalated. She had told herself it was nothing. She was good at telling herself things were nothing. Dennis Hargrove lived in the house directly adjacent to hers. He was 63, retired from insurance, and served on the Civic Association board with the particular dedication of a man who had in retirement reoriented the energy that had once gone into his career toward the management of his immediate environment. He had tried to block Diane's business permit renewal at the City Planning Commission. He had filed 3 complaints with the zoning office about fencing height. He had spoken to neighbors carefully in the vocabulary of property values and neighborhood character about the direction the street was going. On the Tuesday in question, he had watched Diane unloading from her truck for 11 minutes before calling dispatch to report a suspicious person moving items near a vehicle on Sycamore Bluff Court. He did not mention she was the homeowner. He did not mention he had been watching her. He gave a description that was accurate in every specific detail and misleading in its entire construction, because he understood that the specific words were what dispatch recorded and the framing was what determined the response. Voss was assigned the call. He accelerated before the dispatcher finished the address. Noah Trask was 26, 14 months on the job, still in his probationary period. He had come to law enforcement with the specific earnestness of someone who had genuinely thought about what it was for. On the drive to the call, he noted twice that the address in the system was registered to a licensed K-9 training facility with a current business permit. He mentioned this to Voss. Voss told him to stay focused. Trask looked out the window and stayed focused, and understood in the way that junior officers learn to understand things, that staying focused meant not saying it again. Diane heard the tires before she saw the cars. She had set down the second feed bag near the truck's rear bumper and was checking her phone. A message from her afternoon client about rescheduling a distraction protocol session when the sound reached her. 2 vehicles well above the residential speed limit taking the turn into the cul-de-sac at an angle that put rubber against pavement. She looked up. The first cruiser stopped with its front bumper 4 feet from her truck. The second angled in behind, cutting the street. Neither position was consistent with a normal residential traffic stop. Both positions were consistent with officers who expected someone to run. Diane was standing in her driveway holding a bag of dog food. She kept her hands visible, both of them out and open fingers slightly spread at a height that could not be misread. This was not a decision she made in that moment. It was a posture she had practiced until it was automatic, the way a musician's fingers find the right position without thought. Years of understanding how bodies communicate to other bodies in high-stress encounters. Voss was out before the engine cut. He crossed the lawn at a pace that communicated what he had already decided. Step away from the vehicle. Good afternoon, officer. Steady, measured. I live here. This is my property. My name is Diane Mercer. I own this house. These are groceries for my dogs. She moved 1 step to the side, hands maintained. Is there something I can help you understand? Voss's eyes were moving from her hands to the truck to the fence line where Bravo and Colt had already shifted from their kennel positions to the gate end of the yard, their barking registering the elevated energy coming off the driveway. The sound seemed to confirm something for him that her words were failing to confirm. We got a call. Package theft in this area. Someone matching your description. I'm unloading feed in my own driveway, Diane said. My permits and vehicle registration are in the house. I'm happy to get them. Turn around. Hands on the vehicle. Officer, I haven't done anything. I'd like to understand the basis for this before we proceed. That was the moment. Not when she challenged him, when she stayed calm while doing it. Voss had a particular and specific intolerance for the steadiness of people who should, by his internal accounting, be frightened. Her composure did not read to him as cooperation. It read to him as defiance dressed in the clothing of cooperation, and defiance was a language he had only one response to. He grabbed her left shoulder with his right hand and turned her. She absorbed the movement, went with it, rather than against it, redistributing the force through her posture, the way someone trained in physical compliance techniques learns to do not from fear, but from the clear-eyed understanding that her response to this moment was being recorded by every phone on the street. Her chest hit the rear quarter panel of her truck. The impact compressed her lungs. "Officer, still controlled even so. I am complying with your instructions. I am placing my hands on the vehicle. I want to note for anyone recording this that I have not been given a lawful basis for this stop. I have not resisted any instruction, and I have not been informed of a specific charge." From behind the fence, Bravo's bark dropped an octave. The second feed bag tipped against the truck's bumper and split at its base seam. 40 pounds of kibble spread slowly across the concrete, pooling against the tire, running into the crack between the driveway and the lawn. Trask circled the truck to Diane's right. The expression he was wearing was the expression of a young officer watching a situation become something he did not have precise language for yet. He took her right wrist, not roughly, but completing the physical control Voss had initiated, and she felt the cuffs click on her left wrist first, then the right. Too tight on the left. She noted it. "Why am I being detained?" The clarity of her voice in the afternoon air made 2 more windows crack open across the street. "I have not committed any crime. I have shown no aggression. I am a licensed business operator at this address. I have not been informed of a specific charge." Voss pressed harder against her back. He hated this. That was the honest word for what was happening behind his eyes. He hated that she wasn't afraid. He hated that her sentences were complete, and her voice was level, and her attention was clearly on the witnesses gathering at the edges of the driveway. Fear made these encounters work the way they were supposed to work. It produced compliance. It simplified the narrative. It allowed the officer's version to fill the space that the subject's panic left empty. This woman's steadiness was filling that space herself, with her own version out loud in full sentences on camera. "Detained for investigation of theft," Voss said into her ear. "And resisting." "I am not resisting anything." She turned her head slightly, making deliberate eye contact with Rosa, who was now 3 houses down, and had not lowered her phone for a single second. "I am asking legitimate questions about why I am being assaulted in my own driveway." The word assaulted hit something in Voss that tightened his grip. She had named what was happening. She had given it its correct word on camera, and the naming of it, the refusal to use softer language, the precise legal vocabulary applied to his conduct, made him the subject of the sentence rather than its author. He swept her legs. She went down onto the concrete. Both knees first, then the weight of him coming down behind her, his knee finding the space between her shoulder blades, and the full press of it compressing her lungs in stages. Trask moved to her legs, adding his weight, and together they pinned her completely. "Get off me!" For the first time, something cracked in her voice. Not from fear from the physical reality of 2 men's combined weight preventing her from drawing a full breath. "You're hurting me. I haven't done anything wrong." 3 doors down, Rosa had not broken her recording angle once. She had moved steadily closer, keeping to the sidewalk's edge, her footage widening to include the full scene: Diane on the ground, both officers on top of her, the spilled dog food spreading across the driveway, and the figure on the porch of the adjacent house. Dennis Hargrove, arms folded loosely across his chest, weight settled back on his heels, watching. Behind the fence, the barking changed again. It was no longer territorial. It was no longer even an alarm. It had reached the register Diane had calibrated through hundreds of hours of training the register. That meant the animal had completed its assessment and arrived at a decision. It was lower than an alarm and more focused than a warning. It carried inside it the weight of a conclusion. Diane lifted her head. Cheek scraped lungs, compressed, both wrists cuffed. and her voice carried across the cul-de-sac to every porch, every phone, every neighbor still watching. Last chance, both of you. Step back. Move away from my property. You are about to make a mistake that cannot be undone. Voss pressed his knee in deeper, and Rosa Calloway lifted the gate latch. The gate swung inward without a sound. Bravo came through first, and Colt a half-second behind him, and they covered the lawn in a movement that most of the neighbors watching would spend the next several days attempting to describe accurately and failing. It was not a sprint, because a sprint implies a point of maximum effort. What they did was already maximum from the first stride, body's low trajectory split covering 40 feet, with the compressed efficiency of animals that had been trained to operate in environments where the distance between response and outcome was measured in fractions of seconds. They reached Diane and formed around her, not on her, around her. Bravo positioning at her left shoulder body, angled toward Voss, between the officer and the handler he had spent 2.5 years bonded to. Colt, spreading wide toward the space, Trask occupied. A flanking position that was not random. It was the trained protective formation built through hundreds of repetitions that Diane had designed specifically for exactly this kind of scenario, though she had designed it for forward positions in combat theaters, and not for a driveway in suburban Ohio. The sound that came out of both animals was not a bark. It was something below a bark, something that came from a different place. A sound that the neighbors on the porches felt in their chests before they processed it with their ears. Voss's hand was on his weapon. He had it clear of the holster in less than 2 seconds. His training was real. His reaction time was real. His hand as he leveled the barrel at the closer animal was shaking. Aggressive dogs. Aggressive dogs. He was announcing it to his radio, to the street, to himself, to anything that would make the situation make sense. Trask had stumbled off the curb. He was up, both hands out in front of him, staring at the 2 massive animals surrounding the woman on the ground, and his face was the face of someone watching events move faster than his training had prepared him for. Then Diane spoke. Stay. The silence that followed was a physical thing. It had weight and temperature and edges. Bravo and Colt were stationary, exactly as stationary as they had been in motion, with the same quality of absolute commitment. They did not settle. They did not fidget. They held their positions with the complete stillness of working animals that have received a command from their handler and are executing it with total fidelity, regardless of the circumstances. 8 feet from Voss's drawn weapon, fangs showing, eyes unmoving, bodies broadcasting readiness that was held under a control so precise it was almost more frightening than the charge had been. The street was quiet. A car 2 blocks over had stopped its driver watching. The woman filming from the Henderson property had not moved. Rosa's phone was steady. Every recording that existed of the next 20 seconds showed the same thing. A cuffed woman on a driveway. 2 enormous dogs in perfect stillness. And Officer Craig Voss, with his service weapon, pointed at animals that were not moving. Diane turned her eyes toward him. She did not raise her voice. They're trained to wait for my command. She said it with the measured patience of someone explaining something they have explained many times before. Whatever you do in the next 30 seconds, they will not move unless I tell them to. You're safe. A pause. You should put the gun away. Noah Trask got himself off the curb. He brushed his knee without looking at it. He stood still for a moment, regulating his breathing the way his training academy instructor had told him to regulate it in elevated stress situations. And he looked at the 2 animals that had not moved since the woman on the ground had spoken one word to them. He had been a police officer for 14 months. He had worked alongside K-9 units on 3 occasions. He knew what trained dogs looked like. He had never seen anything like this. He crossed the lawn slowly, keeping his body low and his movements deliberate, the way you move around any animal you are uncertain of. Bravo's eyes tracked him with the precision of a camera on a mount, following every inch of his approach, registering it, cataloging it, making no response to it that was not already decided. Trask reached the collar. It was military-spec nylon. Black, wide with a row of D-rings and a shortwave receiver integrated into the side panel hardware that was not available at any store Trask had ever been in. He reached for the primary tag with 2 fingers, moved slowly, and Bravo's eyes went to his hand and stayed there, and the hand did not stop, and the dog did not move. Trask took the tag and turned it toward the afternoon light. He read it. He read it again. U.S. Army, Special Operations Command, Asset Registry, number 7D-0441. Handler, Sergeant Diane Mercer. He released it and moved to Colt. The second dog's collar carried the same military hardware, the same registry format. 2 tags hung from the primary D-ring, 1 on each side, which was unusual. He turned the first one. Pentagon K-9 Asset Registry Unit, 7-Delta, Retired Operational Status. He turned the second. The front read, U.S. Department of Justice Contractor Identification. He turned it over. The back read, Diane L. Mercer, Certified Federal K-9. Evaluator, U.S. Department of Justice. Contractor. ID 7-Delta-09. Active credential. Trask stayed crouched. He was looking at the text the way a person looks at words they are certain they are reading correctly, and whose meaning their brain is refusing to assemble at full speed. He read it a third time. The letters did not rearrange themselves. DOJ. Certified Federal K-9 Evaluator. Active credential. He stood up. Craig. He said it quietly. Not his partner's nickname. His name. Voss still had his weapon half raised. He was watching the dogs with the focused attention of a man who expected the situation to change the moment he looked away. What? You need to see this. I need you to call animal control. Get on the radio. Craig. Trask's voice was quieter than it had been. I need you to come look at this right now. Something in the register of it. The specific flatness, the absence of anything that sounded like a junior officer deferring to a senior one made Voss turn his head. Trask held the tag out flat in his palm, facing up so Voss could read it from where he stood. Voss took a step toward him. He looked at the tag. He did not pick it up. His eyes moved across the text slowly, the way eyes move when they are doing the reading, while the brain is doing something else. Then he took it from Trask's palm. He had to take it. He needed it in his hand. He needed the physical object, because what his eyes were showing him was not resolving correctly at this distance, and he needed to close the gap between himself and the information and make it real. He read the front. He read the back. DOJ, Certified Federal K-9 Evaluator. Contractor ID 7-Delta-09. Active credential. The tag was in his fingers, and the tag was nothing. A few grams of stamped metal smaller than a playing card, lighter than anything that should be capable of ending a career. And the tag was simultaneously everything. He stood in the middle of Diane Mercer's lawn with 6 cameras on him, and 2 military dogs 8 feet away, and his service weapon half holstered, and the tag in his hand, and the understanding arrived in him in stages, the way very bad news arrives, each stage worse than the one before it. The woman on the ground behind him was not a suspect. She was a federal contractor. Her signature was on the certification papers for every working dog in his department. He had her cuffed on her own driveway. He had pressed his knee into her spine for 4 minutes. He had drawn his weapon at her animals. He had done all of it in front of at least 6 recording devices, while she remained calm and cataloged every violation in complete sentences, loud enough for the microphones to capture. He looked at Trask. Trask said nothing. His face said it instead. Something happened to Voss's hand. The tag was still in it, and his grip had loosened in a way he was not directing his fingers. Uncurling slightly, the weight of the tag shifting the metal warm from his palm. The color that had been in his face during the arrest, the flush of authority asserted of a situation being controlled, was leaving it by degrees, replaced by something paler, something that did not have a confident name. His eyes went to the dogs, still motionless, still watching him with that total unbroken attention, still waiting for her word. He looked at Diane. She was looking at him from the concrete cheek-scraped wrists, cuffed the feed spilled around her, and her face carried the expression of a woman who has been waiting for someone to arrive at a specific conclusion, and who is now watching them arrive at it, and who feels nothing about it, except the quiet satisfaction of being right about how a thing would resolve. "My federal contractor identification," she said with a patience that was almost clinical, "is in my left jacket pocket. My military service record is on file with the DOJ contractor office." She held his gaze without blinking. "I was the evaluator who last certified your department's K-9 unit. The next recertification is in 11 weeks. I would think very carefully about your next decision." Voss's hand lowered. The tag was still in his fingers. He could feel it there. He would feel it there for a long time after this afternoon. Trask was watching him. The neighbors were watching him. Every phone was watching him. He holstered his weapon. The motion was not smooth. His hand was not steady. "You're under arrest." He said it without the volume he had used 20 minutes earlier. Assault on a police officer. Resisting. Threatening officers with dangerous animals. He said it because there was no other direction to move. He had come too far in one direction to turn around, and the mechanism of what he had set in motion did not have a reverse setting, and so he walked Diane Mercer toward the cruiser, and Bravo and Colt stayed exactly where she had commanded them to stay. And they watched her go, without following, without a sound, like two sentinels at the gate of something that no longer had anything left inside it worth guarding. Across the street, Dennis Hargrove unfolded his arms and went inside. When the animal control van arrived, the dogs submitted to the handlers with a patience that made one of the officers stop and look at her colleague. They went into the van because their handler was gone, and the command had expired, and they were in every sense waiting. The interrogation room smelled of old coffee and industrial cleaner, and the particular stale recycled air of a space that had not been designed with comfort as a priority. Diane sat across the metal table from Voss' wrist's sore left wrist, bearing the marks of cuffs applied too tight. She had requested an attorney the moment she sat down. She had said it clearly twice with the same composure she had held throughout, and she had answered nothing after it. Voss was writing his report. He read it aloud as he wrote his voice, at a volume calibrated to carry across the table, loud enough to be heard too low to be formally addressed. Subject: Diane Mercer deliberately incited trained attack animals against responding officers. Dogs advanced in a threatening manner, consistent with assault training. Subject used military-style commands to control animals during confrontation after deployment. "I'd like my attorney," Diane said. He kept writing. Trask sat at the corner of the table with his department laptop open and the body cam footage playing. The footage showed what it showed. Diane at the truck, hands visible. Voss crossing the lawn at pace. The grab, the spin, the impact with the quarter panel. Diane on the ground. Voice-controlled, hands cuffed. The dogs charging and stopping. Her one word, and the absolute stillness that followed. Voss's weapon drawn and pointed at stationary animals. Trask's finger hovered above the keyboard. He was aware of what the footage showed, and what the report being written across from him described, and that those two things were not the same event. He was aware that his probationary review was 7 months away. He was aware of Colton's relationship to Voss, and what Colton's signature meant on a personnel evaluation. He sat with all of this, and his finger above the keyboard, and did not move. He closed the laptop. Sergeant Raymond Colton arrived 45 minutes after the arrest. He reviewed Voss's 2-page report while standing at the duty desk, did not sit down, did not request the body cam footage, signed off on it in under 10 minutes, nodded at Voss as he left, and returned to his vehicle. That evening, the local news aired a 40-second segment. Blurred footage of the dogs crossing the lawn, the frame selected to maximize the impression of chaos and minimize the impression of anything stopping, paired with Voss's statement outside the precinct. Officer safety was at risk. We made the call we were trained to make. The anchor said dog attack 3 times. In the house next door to Diane's, Dennis Hargrove watched the broadcast with a glass of wine and the settled satisfaction of a man whose plan had worked. He opened the Civic Association group chat and typed 2 words: situation handled. Diane was released on bond at 8:17 that evening. The woman who had posted it was Nadine Okafor, a civil rights litigator from Columbus 47, with close-cropped natural hair and the specific quality of stillness that belongs to people who have spent long careers being the calmest person in very loud rooms. Diane had called her from the precinct's one permitted phone call. She had dialed the number from memory because she had committed it to memory approximately 8 months ago, on the day she first noticed Voss's cruiser slowing outside her fence for the second time. She was the kind of person who kept numbers she hoped never to need. They spoke for 6 minutes outside the precinct, Diane delivering the sequence of events in order precise and complete, Nadine listening without interrupting. Then Diane drove alone to the animal control facility. She did not go in. She parked along the chain link that bordered the holding area and cut her engine. The exterior lights were thin and cast long shadows across the runs. In the 3rd run from the left, something moved the specific purposeful pacing of an intelligent animal in a space that made no sense to it. In the run beside it, a shape sat facing the fence. She sat with her hands in her lap and looked at them for a long time. Then, she drove home. The house told her immediately. Not because anything was displaced. Everything was exactly where she had left it that morning. The water bowls were full and undisturbed. The kibble in the corner measure untouched. The blankets at the foot of her bed holding the shapes of 2 animals that weren't in them. She walked through 3 rooms and went out to the backyard to the kennel area and sat down on the concrete floor of the run that Colt preferred when the weather was mild. She pressed her back against the chain link. The rain started 20 minutes later. She sat in it and thought about Marcus, about the summer after they were married, when he had trained alongside her, learning to work with Recon Bravo's predecessor, a Malinois, who had died of old age and left a gap in the house for 3 weeks that felt structural. Marcus had understood the handler-dog relationship with a precision most civilians didn't reach. He had understood it was not ownership. It was a contract built on consistency, and you did not break it without leaving a mark. She was not breaking it. She had not left them, but she was not there, and they were behind chain link, and the distance between those 2 facts was not as large as it needed to be tonight. She sat in the rain for a while longer. Then she went inside. By 8 the next morning, she was in Nadine's office. Nadine laid the charges across her desk and read through them with the focused efficiency of someone who reads professionally damaging documents, the way other people read train schedules, extracting what is relevant, noting what is missing, moving to the next thing. When she finished, she set the papers aside. The animal control classification triggered an automatic assessment protocol, she said without softening it. The assessment is scheduled in 4 days. If the evaluator classifies Bravo and Colt as dangerous animals, the euthanasia process becomes procedural. Voss knows this. The charges were constructed to activate this outcome. She let that settle for exactly 1 second, which means this was not a bad day. This was a plan. Then the knock came, Rosa Calloway pushed the door open with the energy of someone who has been waiting in a hallway long enough to decide that waiting politely is no longer a proportionate use of her time. She was carrying her phone in one hand and a small hard case in the other. Two devices, she said without preamble. My phone and the Henderson doorbell camera at number 14. The doorbell caught the full sequence. The gate, the dog stopping, the tag. She set both on the desk, and Hargrove on his porch with his arms folded watching the whole thing. Nadine picked up Rosa's phone. She played the footage once all the way through without speaking. When it ended, she set the phone down and folded her hands on the desk and looked at the middle distance for a moment, in the way that attorneys look at nothing when they are organizing something important. We have everything we need for the defense, she said. What we also have is the basis for a federal filing. She opened her laptop. You're a DOJ contractor. Your federal work authorization was actively obstructed during the commission of an arrest the arresting officer had reason to know was unsupported by probable cause. She was already typing. This doesn't go to state court. This goes federal. She typed for a moment without looking up, and Voss knew about the tag before he filed that report. The news of Nadine's motions reached Voss through Colton, who had received a call from the department's legal liaison that Colton described to Voss in the precinct break room as the kind of call that makes you want to retire early. The liaison had written down phrases like contractor obstruction inquiry and credential protection protocol, and underlined them, which was not something the liaison did often. Voss did not respond to pressure by becoming more careful. He never had. He responded to pressure by acting, and the action he took that evening was to go to the evidence tech room under the pretext of reviewing footage for a supplemental report, a procedure technically within protocol, and to spend 12 minutes reviewing his own body cam footage on the workstation before transferring it to his department-issued laptop. The version submitted to Nadine's office the following morning, in response to her emergency disclosure motion, had a 4-minute gap. The gap began precisely at the moment Diane stated she was a federal contractor and requested that her licensing authority be contacted. It ended just after the gate opened. The intervening window containing Diane's clearest verbal identification, Voss's response to it, and the complete sequence of the dogs stopping on command was listed in the submission documentation as corrupted due to firmware upload conflict on unit. The gap was not a malfunction. It was a decision. It was the document a person produces when they have reviewed footage carefully and removed the sections where the footage and their report describe different events. Nadine received the submission. Read the gap notation cross-referenced the timing against Rosa's footage and noted that Rosa's recording captured Voss's voice in the background during the window that the body cam listed as corrupted. She called the DOJ contractor office. Voss and Colton found Trask in the precinct parking garage on Thursday afternoon. Voss did the talking. Colton stood to the side with his arms folded, not threatening in any way that could be documented, which was a specific kind of threatening. The message was short. The report was the report. The probationary review was in 7 months, and Trask had not witnessed anything that was not in the report. Trask nodded. He drove from the garage to a gas station 2 miles away and pulled into a space at the far end of the lot and sat with the engine running. He was thinking about the body cam footage. He was thinking about the tag he had held in his fingers. He was thinking about the specific quality of Diane Mercer's voice during the arrest. Not its words, though the words had been clear, but its register. The complete absence of panic in a situation designed to produce it. He was thinking about what a person has to have survived in order to speak in complete sentences while being pressed into concrete by 2 officers in front of cameras, and he was thinking about what it meant that he had watched all of that and closed his laptop. He was thinking about a woman's dogs in a concrete kennel waiting. He reached for his personal cell phone. He found the number. He pressed call. Nadine answered on the second ring. Trask's call lasted 47 minutes. He started with the arrest and moved forward in sequence describing what the footage showed. versus what the report said with the precision of someone who had been reviewing both in his memory for 3 days and had them memorized. He described the parking garage conversation. He described watching Voss review the footage on the evidence text workstation. He described the transfer to the department laptop. Nadine listened to all of it without a word. At the end, she said, "Written statement, not on a department device. Personal computer or handwritten. Signed and dated. I need it by 7 a.m. A pause. She said, "I know what this costs. I want you to hear something precisely. Her dogs are scheduled for a euthanasia evaluation in 14 hours. Every minute you wait is a minute the gap in that footage goes unexplained by the person who can explain it." Another pause. "Okay," Trask said. She received his statement by email at 5:53 the following morning. 7 pages. Thorough, accurate, written in plain language that would hold up in any court that read it. It covered the arrest, the tag on the collar, the parking garage exchange, and the moment he watched Voss edit the footage. It ended with a paragraph he had not been asked for and had written anyway. "I should have said something at the gate. I knew what was happening. I didn't say it. I'm saying it now." Nadine filed in federal court at 11:43 that morning. She filed federally because Diane was not simply a civilian whose civil rights had been violated. She was a DOJ-credentialed contractor whose federal work authorization had been knowingly obstructed by an officer who had read her contractor ID on the back of a dog's collar tag and arrested her anyway. The filing was 61 pages. It cited 4 federal statutes. It attached Rosa's footage, the Henderson doorbell footage, a forensic notation from a digital evidence specialist, observing that the body cam gap was consistent with deliberate editing rather than firmware degradation, and Trask's 7-page signed statement. The DOJ Contractor Compliance Office called Captain Bill Marsh at 8:47 the following morning. Marsh was 61, 18 years in command, and had survived that long through a practiced ability to read the room in real time. The call lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds. When it ended, he sat in his office chair looking at the photograph on his wall, himself shaking hands with the mayor at his command appointment, both of them smiling for 3 minutes without moving. Then he called his legal counsel. What his legal counsel told him after reviewing Nadine's filing was something he had not anticipated. Because Diane's DOJ evaluator credential was currently under active federal protection as part of the obstruction case, no new K-9 certification she had issued or was scheduled to issue could be independently verified outside the federal case resolution. The Greenvale PD's K-9 unit, 3 dogs, 3 handlers. The operational program that ran on those certifications was placed under a federal credentialing review pending the case's conclusion. While the review was pending, the K-9 unit could not be deployed. Marsh's legal counsel explained this to him carefully. Marsh listened to all of it. Then he read it again from the filing itself to make sure he had understood. The officer who had arrested the woman who certified the department's dogs had grounded every police dog his department operated. Marsh set the paper down. He sat in his chair and looked at the wall for a very long moment. Not at the photograph this time, just at the wall. Diane arrived at the animal control facility at 8:40 with Nadine beside her. Voss's patrol car was in the visitor space nearest the entrance, parked at the angle of someone who does not expect to be there long and does not consider parking conventions applicable to themselves. Through the glass entrance doors, Diane could see Voss inside, standing close to a man in a green facility uniform who was holding a clipboard and nodding at a frequency that suggested he was doing more nodding than processing. Nadine noted the patrol car and sent a message to Rosa, who was parked on the facility's access road 200 meters back. The message said, "Now." Rosa walked to the facility's side entrance and positioned herself in the hallway. Diane was allowed 15 minutes with Bravo and Colt before the formal evaluation. She walked into the holding area, and they came to her at a controlled pace, not running, not vocalizing, but with the specific energy of animals who have been in an unfamiliar, stressful environment for 72 hours and are now in the presence of the one variable that makes every other variable irrelevant. Bravo pressed against her left side. Colt pressed against her right. She put her hands on both of them and stood still for a moment. Just that. Then she ran them. She put Bravo and Colt through a full military-grade obedience assessment, the same assessment she administered to working dogs being evaluated for law enforcement deployment. Every element, every command. Sit, stay, heel, recall, position hold, directional movement, distraction protocol, contact restraint, release. Both dogs performed with a precision that made Dr. Paul Greer, the facility's senior behavioral assessor, stop writing his notes twice, set his pen down, and simply watch. At the assessment's conclusion, Greer walked forward and crouched beside Colt, studying the dog's response to the approach of an unfamiliar person. Colt did not move from position. His eyes tracked Greer with the calm, attentive steadiness of a working dog executing a hold command. 19 years I have been doing this, Greer said to the clipboard, rather than to anyone in particular. These are among the most precisely trained animals I have ever assessed. He stood. No indicators of aggression. The evaluation is clear. He turned toward his office. Voss was in the hallway. He stood close to Greer, closer than the space required, and spoke in a low tone for 45 seconds, his body language doing a specific kind of work, the kind that a uniform assists. Greer nodded. His posture was the posture of a man being told something by someone he does not feel in a position to refuse. At the end of the 45 seconds, Greer said 4 words. "I'll see what I can do." Voss walked away. Rosa had captured all of it. Greer turned toward his office and found Nadine in the hallway. Her phone turned, so the screen faced him, playing 11 seconds of footage. Greer watched the screen. He looked at his clipboard. He looked at Nadine. She said nothing. She did not need to. "I'll need to revise the preliminary notes," Greer said quietly. "I'll wait," Nadine said. The federal court's emergency order halting the euthanasia proceeding arrived at the facility's administrative office at 8:49 in the morning. 11 minutes before the formal determination phase was scheduled to begin. 3 pages citing Diane's active federal contractor status and the pending federal case, making the proceeding against her animals a matter under federal protection review until the underlying case resolved. The facility's director read it, confirmed its authenticity by phone, and walked to Greer's office. Greer's revised assessment, reflecting what he had actually observed, was filed with the court the same morning. He noted in a section he had not been asked for that the animal's conduct during the arrest sequence, as documented in available footage, was consistent with trained protective behavior and not with assault behavior, and that the distinction was both behavioral and legally significant. He also submitted a separate written account of his hallway conversation with Voss. Signed. Dated. With the time. Nadine filed Greer's hallway footage with the federal court that afternoon, adding witness tampering to the existing charges of civil rights violation, evidence tampering, and obstruction of a federal contractor's lawful activity. Marsh suspended Voss and Colton that same afternoon, effective immediately, in a conference room away from the duty floor, with departmental HR present. He did it in writing. He did it because the DOJ was now involved, because his legal counsel had explained the K-9 unit grounding to him twice, and because Marsh had spent 18 years reading rooms, and this room was not one he could survive reading incorrectly. Colton called the union representative from the parking lot. The conversation lasted 6 minutes. When it ended, he sat in his car for a while before calling the federal investigator's office and asking to speak with someone about cooperation arrangements. The union, upon reviewing the federal filings, issued a statement 3 days later. It would not provide legal defense for conduct falling outside the scope of standard law enforcement activities. 2 sentences. Voss's attorney read it, and then had a frank conversation with his client about the legal landscape that currently existed, and the one that had existed before the federal filing, and the significant differences between them. Hargrove's connection was documented in Nadine's filing as contextual background, the pattern of complaints against minority residents, the 3 zoning filings, the permit objection, the call log from the day of the arrest. Investigators pulled his records. 4 neighbors provided accounts of Hargrove's conversations about the street's direction over the past 3 years. He was charged with filing a false police report. The charge was specific, documented, and delivered by a federal process server on a Thursday morning. Trask's 7-page statement was entered into the federal record in full. The federal investigators' written assessment noted his account was consistent across every point with the available footage and the digital forensic evidence. It did not inoculate him from departmental review. There were questions about his conduct during the arrest, about the moments when the situation could have been interrupted and was not, but it placed him differently than silence would have. The morning the charges against Voss were formally filed, Nadine drove to Marsh's office. She did not have an appointment. She did not need one because the nature of the conversation she was coming to have was the kind that happens before appointments become relevant. She sat across from Marsh, and she said one thing in the particular tone she used when she was stating something rather than arguing it. The officer who arrested my client had read her DOJ contractor credential before he walked her to the cruiser. The tag was in his hand. He understood who she was and what her credential meant, and he arrested her anyway. And in doing so, he grounded your K-9 unit. She paused 1 beat. I want you to sit with that, because when this goes to federal hearing, I am going to say it in a courtroom, and I am going to say it out loud, and I am going to say it with the documentation that proves it. Your department arrested the person who certifies your dogs. I'd recommend you cooperate with everything the investigator asks for. Marsh looked at her across his desk. He did not argue. There was nothing to argue. The facts were the facts, and they had been documented by 6 cameras and a digital forensic specialist and a 7-page signed statement from his own officer and a DOJ contractor office that had used the phrase active federal obstruction on a phone call that he had recorded in his own notes. Yes, he said, we will cooperate fully. Nadine stood, gathered her files, and left. The animal control director opened the kennel gate herself. She pulled the cards, walked to the holding section, and opened it herself, because she had read enough of the documentation to know that the least she could do for the woman waiting in the yard was to not make her wait for the right key to be found. The gate swung open. Bravo and Colt crossed the concrete at a run, and what they did when they reached her was not what people expected when they expected working dogs to express reunion. There was no leaping. There was no noise. Bravo pressed his massive head into her chest and stayed there, his full weight leaning into her, and she wrapped both arms around his neck and held on. Colt moved to her right side and pressed his shoulder against her hip, and was still, his eyes scanning the yard with the alert, patient attention of an animal on watch. She knelt on the concrete. She buried her face in Bravo's coat. She did not speak. For a long moment, the yard was very quiet. Rosa Calloway was there. She had driven over without being called, the way she had lifted the gate latch without being asked, because she understood what was needed and moved toward it. She stood near the fence with her hands in her jacket pockets and did not record and did not speak. She was simply present, which was what the moment required. Diane stood eventually. Both dogs repositioned with her moving when she moved, settling, when she settled in the way they had for 2.5 years, that had become in the 72 hours of their absence more visible to her as something she could lose. She looked at Rosa. There was nothing adequate to say, so they didn't. Voss was served his federal charges in the Greenvale PD's precinct parking lot at 2 that afternoon. Civil rights violation, evidence tampering, obstruction of a federal contractor's lawful activity. A federal process server and 2 DOJ investigators were present. Voss received the documents with an expression that did not change much, which was the expression of a man who had been told by his attorney what was coming and had had several days to prepare a face for it. Colton received his package 20 minutes later at his home address. He opened the front door in a t-shirt and accepted the documents with the expression of a man who had been cooperating for 4 days and was still surprised by the weight of a thing when it arrived in physical form. Hargrove's package arrived by process server at 8:20 that morning. His house was listed with a realtor's agency within the following week. He did not speak publicly about the charges. He resigned from the Civic Association board by email and was not heard from again on Sycamore Bluff Court. The Greenvale PD's 3 K9 handlers were informed that same week that their operational status remained suspended pending the federal credentialing review. The dogs were kennel housed, still fed, still maintained, but not deployable. 3 working animals trained and ready grounded because of the actions of one officer who had held a tag in his hand that told him exactly who he was dealing with and had arrested her anyway. Trask submitted his full written statement to the federal investigator. It was the statement he had sent Nadine 7 pages complete, signed. He submitted it again formally because he wanted it in the official record twice. His departmental review was ongoing. The outcome was uncertain. He did not know, standing in the federal investigator's office with his written statement on the desk between them, what his career looked like on the other side of this. He had thought about that in the parking lot of the gas station 2 miles from the precinct. He had thought about it for 41 minutes. Then he had called Nadine anyway. The federal hearing was 6 weeks after the arrest. The charges against Diane were dismissed with prejudice in a courtroom that was not large enough for everyone who had wanted to attend. Judge Elaine Dawson read the dismissal order in a voice that was neither warm nor cold. The voice of a court that has examined a full record and found it unambiguous. Voss pleaded guilty to evidence tampering and federal obstruction, receiving 30 months in federal custody and a permanent bar from law enforcement service of any kind. His attorney, in the statement he read into the record on his client's behalf, used the phrase, "moment of poor judgment," which was the phrase his attorney had selected, and which Voss sat beside without visible reaction, his hands flat on the defense table, looking at a point somewhere past the gallery. Colton, whose cooperation had been substantial and fully documented, received a suspended sentence and permanent removal from any supervisory capacity, his pension subject to a structured reduction that his attorney had negotiated down from the original proposal, and which his attorney described to him afterward as the best available outcome. Hargrove was fined at the ceiling of his charge level and placed on 2 years probation. The city of Greenvale settled Diane's civil rights lawsuit without admitting fault. The settlement figure was not publicly disclosed, but Nadine described it in a brief statement on the courthouse steps as sufficient to rebuild what was taken and expand what was there. The funds were used to reconstruct and formally federally accredit Mercer K9, which entered into a partnership with 2 veterans organizations, providing trained service dogs to combat veterans, managing the specific residue of service that Marcus had carried, and that Diane understood from both sides, as the person who had trained the animals, and as the person who had loved someone who needed one. Diane recertified the Greenvale Police Department's K9 unit herself 8 months after the hearing. She was not required to. No provision of the settlement, no order of the court, no condition of any agreement compelled her participation in the department's continued operations. She chose to do it because the dogs had not done anything. 3 Belgian Malinois and a Dutch Shepherd, all of them trained and ready, and completely uninvolved in what their handlers' supervisors had decided. They had been grounded for 8 months because of what Voss had done, and Diane did not believe in punishing animals for the decisions of the people who worked around them. She ran them through the full evaluation, with the same thoroughness she applied to every assessment. All 4 passed. She signed the certifications. She handed the completed documentation to Marsh, who accepted it with an expression that wanted to be gratitude and settled for something more careful. And she gathered her equipment and walked to her truck. Noah Trask was present that day, reassigned to a different unit under new supervision, working through what the departmental review had produced, which was not termination, but was not nothing. And he stood at the back of the facility's observation area and did not approach her and did not speak. When she walked past on her way to the exit, she stopped. She looked at him for a moment, not long, not theatrical, just a look that carried the weight of a considered acknowledgement. He met it for 1 second before looking at the floor. She kept walking. On a Saturday morning in October, almost a year after the arrest, Diane walked Bravo and Colt down Sycamore Bluff Court in the early light before her first training session, when the air still had the cool edge of autumn arriving, and the street carried the specific quiet of a neighborhood not yet fully awake. Several neighbors were on their porches. The Hendersons raised a hand. Mrs. Patterson called something from her porch that was a word of congratulation and did not need to be repeated to be heard. Rosa was at the end of her walkway with coffee in both hands, one for herself and one that she held out as Diane came level with her, because she had known Diane would come this way at this hour on this morning and had planned accordingly. Diane took the coffee. They did not say much. The house next door to Diane's Hargrove's old property had a sold sign where the realtor's lockbox had been, and a family was moving in before the month was out. Diane did not look at it. She handed Rosa's cup back and walked on. Bravo on her left, Colt on her right, both of them steady and unhurried beside her. The three of them moving through the morning in the particular way they had always moved, with the quiet confidence of beings that have been tested completely and have not found anything inside themselves that was not already there. If this story moved you, share it, because accountability, like Diane's, deserves to be seen. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage, truth, and justice that refuses to stay quiet.